So we gaze tonight upon the beauteousness of the Epiphone ES339, a tobacco, no, what would this be called? That's a sort of vintage sunbursty thing. Whoops, sorry. Yeah, sort of, well, just a nice old antique vintage sunburst. Small-bodied, semi-hollow thing, nickel hardware. It's the inspired by Gibson version with the open book headstock. Comes with a NuBone nut, which we're replacing, and pretty good everywhere else. Now, why is it here? Well, it's here because Chris, its owner, wants it as light as possible. Okay. And I had one or two comments on my YouTube-y thing today where people kind of were a little bit critical of, one person called it an obsession about low actions. And, you know, I sort of said back, look, it's you can call it an obsession, but you can also call it a preference that the customer wants. And, you know, it may not suit you, and you may have your own views about, you know, whatever it means to have a high or a low action in terms of your, you know, there's a whole load of mythologies around this sort of thing, and that's fine. But when a customer has a preference, there's usually a reason for it, and a lot of the people who come to me are looking for the lowest possible action because they struggle with hand strength, and that's because a lot of my customers are older than the young guns who come and complain about the obsession with low action and stuff. So, you know, I get it, I understand it's not for you, but try and see it from other people's point of view. So it doesn't, you know, it's not one thing fits everyone, but it's a preference, call it that. And, you know, we know that with that preference, there are certain variables that go into it that can't, well, you can improve some things, you can play off those variables against each other. And then eventually, you know, you do come to a point where there's a limitation about what you can achieve with the action. And, you know, all this work is just about finding a balance that suits my customer with those variables. And ultimately, if a customer has a sort of huge kind of, you know, plays with a huge amount of force, then to be honest, you know, there's not a lot you can do. There's a limit to the improvements you can get when you level frets or raise or lower action. When somebody hits it really hard, the strings move a lot, and they will come into contact with the frets. So there are a number of variables, and this is this is not rocket science or magic. It's about playing off and adjusting the different variables. And so the three primary ones in the setup that I use, as you probably know from if you've watched any of my stuff, is first of all the neck relief, which is all we need to say about it is that the truss rod in your neck is a means to control the amount of curvature that the strings tend historically to put into your neck when you load the guitar and tune it to pitch. And so the truss rod is a crude device for countering that, so that you can set the neck as flat or as curved as you like. My advice on it is to give it as little, well, I say my advice normally is have a tiny bit more than none in terms of relief. So you can measure it, you can get very technical about it. I can tell you this is about 0.25 mils. That means the gap between the fret, the 8th fret, and the bottom of the string when I'm holding down the first and the last frets. That's a quick way to do it. And I can see that there is, first of all, some gap, which is good. Why is there some gap? Because we need a little bit of room for the strings to spin. And how much is there? Just a tiny bit more than none. And what I always mean by that is like a number of things you've got to get familiar with or comfortable with adjusting your own truss rod, because if you don't change it and set more relief, then you won't know what it feels like, and if you don't change it and set less relief, you won't know what it feels like. So if I get the old boardy thing out, if you set a load of relief, okay, even if you have a low action at the nut and at the bridge, your guitar will feel like it has a tall action taller towards the middle, so it can still feel like a high action even if it's low at both ends, or pretty low at both ends. Okay, but the reason that you have to remember that we have the relief in the neck at all usually is so that these strings can spin in a kind of cone or a double cone shape with the most spin in the middle, and so that bit of curvature and relief is very good for allowing the strings to move. Now you don't have to have that curvature to allow the strings to move. So for example, if you have a dead flat neck and quite a tall nut action and quite a tall bridge action, okay, and your strings run between all of those, well, guess what, your strings can spin all they like, and because the action's so high, look at that, doesn't connect with the frets at all, right? But most people don't want as high an action as that because it feels hard to play at both ends, right? So that's the limitation. So typically what we're trying to do is we're trying to set a little bit of curvature, a little bit more than none. We're trying to set as low action here as possible, as low action there as possible, and for the combination of this variable, let's call it variable number 1 here is the relief, variable number 1, variable number 2 the nut, actually do it the other way around, let's do 1, variable number 2 is the bridge, and variable number 3 is the first fret action. So I call this first fret action. I call this relief like everyone else does, and I call this last fret, and I measure it at the last fret because I really care about it at the last fret more than I care about it at the bridge, if you get what I mean. The bridge is only a means to raise it or lower it towards this end of the playing fingerboard, which is the last fret. That's the only one that bothers me. So those are the 3 things in that order that I care about. So the first thing I do is I set the relief to a little more than none, right? And you need to adjust it if it's wrong. So this has to be under load. Okay, if you have it backbowed, by the way, if the neck is backbowed, by which I mean it's got too much negative relief, so it humps like so, it humps, baby, then what happens is when you fret near the middle, or when you fret here in the first half, all of these notes up to about here buzz and choke just on fretting. They're not even on bending. So that is often a symptom. If you get that creeping in, it's often a symptom that you've got what's called back bow. And the simplest way to take care of that is to adjust the truss rot, go counterclockwise to slacken it so it allows the strings to pull, either flatten the neck or pull it into a slight curve, and then you want to tweak it until it's the tiny bit more than none that I've recommended. So that's why you have the truss rod, and those 3 things, truss rod, last fret action, the first fret action, those 3 things predominantly are the things we can adjust. But actually there's if you like, there's a 4th one in, so let me just draw it again quickly. So there's our slightly curved fretboard, there's our first fret action, and here's our last fret. Actually, let's do it slightly different this time. Let's call this our nut, which is where we set the first fret action, and let's call this the bridge, which is where we set the thing that we know as the last fret action, and here's the first fret. It makes sense? So we've got our string going between those like so, and I've got all the frets in between. So what was I going to say? Oh yes, so we're aiming to get a combination of a fairly flat relief, as low as possible on the bridge or the last fret action, and as low as possible on the first fret action. Those 3 things combined will give us overall a very fast low feel. Now there are a couple of external factors to that make a huge difference, and that may or may not be able to be overcome if they're at play. So the first one is the hand of God or Eric Clapton waggling away, striking the strings. Okay, if you strike with a load of force, what's going to happen is your strings are going to spin more, and that amount of force may just be too great for this geometry, this setup. The flat relief, the low bridge action, or the low last fret action, the low first fret action. So you come in, you've got a big hand. So that might tell you straight away, well look, I'm going to have to change something. Well, there is one tiny little thing we can take care of in here, and that is we can level out our frets, okay, and make sure that the fretboard is a nice curve. So that's one thing we can do, and that's what I do. Beyond that, if you do all of that and you still have a very heavy hand, then you're going to have to either reduce, well, you're going to have to reduce something. So you either reduce the force, Luke, i.e. you play lighter, in which case it doesn't spin as much, or if you insist that that's your style, then you have to possibly raise the bridge action, or you have to possibly add a little bit more relief in to give the strings more space. When you've got it all to as good as it can be, if it still can't be played at the action you've chosen, it may be there's no point. You have to know when there's no point trying to level the frets out anymore, because you know you might go chasing, leveling and leveling, thinking the more I level it, I'll eventually be able to get it level so that it overcomes the problem of the wider spin of the strings, in which case you'll end up costing yourself a lot of fret metal. So I'm very aware of the limitations of the leveling. The leveling will make a guitar like this play lower and cleaner, sorry, like this, play lower and cleaner, but if the player has a heavy action, which I'm pretty certain that Chris doesn't, but if they did, then I would have to compensate by raising usually one of these two things, either the bridge or increasing. If you don't want to raise the last fret action by the bridge, then we could try increasing the amount of curvature in the neck. But again, that gives a sense of a higher action in the middle anyway, so we lose the ultimate low feeling that we were after. But the point about this equation is that it is beset by not only these variables which are at play, but it also has constraints within it which you cannot overcome, and I've hopefully pointed out what they look like. So we shall see in practice as we go through, as I drink my coffee, which is now coldish. So that was a little quick sort of expose. Let's put that there, see what I can see. Not very good. I'm terrible with camera angles. Maybe that'll do. Right, so what am I going to do with this? The 339 setup, I'm going to do two things, or four things. I'm going to do a setup on this. I'm going to change the nut for a Tusq adjustable, which is a custom made thing, but it works really well on this guitar. I'm going to level the frets to give them the best chance of the low action, because I can already hear there is some fret, what I call fret slap, at work on this at a fairly high action. Not too much, but a little bit. So the idea will be to just double check. Now I know that these the fretwork on these guitars have got better over the years recently, so I'm confident that it will be fairly good. But the great thing about the method I use is that it enables me to level very, very lightly indeed and check and make sure, or get a sort of diagnostic. So as I level with hardly any metal coming up, I can tell what the state of the neck is, and I can see whether it's going to play the way we want. So I'm going to go from 150 to 125, which is pretty much where that's now set. And we've got a slightly more height than we really want on the first fret here, so we can take care of that with this wonderful adjustable. So I think the thing to do is, let me start by slacking off the strings, and then we'll mark up the strings for fret leveling, because we might as well get straight into that. Oop, wrong way. And we'll also take the nut off and replace it, so we'll get that bit done. Now, right now, the replacement bridge, which is going to be a roller bridge, which isn't strictly necessary on this, but for a £20 investment, it gives you a little bit more intonation travel room, and also it's kinder on the palm, so it feels nice, and it's also a little bit gentler on the strings. So for 21 quid or something, including postage, it's a nice touch. But I can change that out last of all when that arrives, so I'll do the setup today without that, since I only ordered it, was it yesterday probably? Now with these Epiphones, what's good about them too is they have improved, like I say, and I always do this in touch wood, but I will find that it looks like a nice nut, and it is NuBone, and some people will say, but there's nothing wrong with it at all, and it's a kind of chalky substance. It does work okay, but yeah, it's not the best material. This Tusq, and with the adjustable nut part, works really well, and it's almost a drop-in with a little bit of downward adjustment required. So what I'm gonna do is just go off to one side, and we're going to also, we take the strings that are currently on it are 10s, and I'm going to replace them with 9s, but I'm going to do the fret leveling with 10s. Now it's only a small amount different. It won't make any major difference to the leveling on this, so I'm just going to borrow up this dirty old board. I need to replace this. So the first thing I want to do is just I want to get me a flat face with the adjustable nut. Now, what I didn't show you, what I did beforehand, I get it flush first. What I did beforehand with this, where are you, is inside of there's a little brass protector or strengthening strip so that the grub screws land on a little metal footing, but I've also flattened the grub screws on the bottom so that they press flat against this, and it just strengthens up this 3D printed object a little bit more, because it's not, 3D isn't, the original Gibson cradle for this thing was originally it was brass, which proved to be, well, the cradle's actually fine whatever it's made of, as you can tell here, but they made the whole thing in brass, and then it failed because it was effectively a 0 fret nut they had innovated or made, and as a result it wore very, very quickly, because brass is not a good 0 fret. Actually, nickel silver isn't a good 0 fret either. It's the strength or the eroding power of the strings on a 0 fret is quite incredible. Now, one of the things I can't quite see up close, I have to move this annoyingly. Forgive me while I just have a quick look sideways on. Okay, that's just inside its gap. That's good. That'll do nicely. Yeah, so they made this unit out of brass. It notched immediately, so then they went away, and Gibson went away and made an alternative in I think titanium, understandably, and I think that, I don't know whether that was given away to customers or they bought it. Never did find out an answer to that. Anyway, the point being, while that was going on, I think it was about 2015, this original Gibson innovation. You've got to remember that for Gibson it was an absolutely brilliant idea. The amount of complaints I heard about Gibsons and tuning, mainly, people like to come up with their own version of what was causing the famous Gibson out of tune or tuning instability problem. They blame the headstock, which isn't a brilliant design shape, right? Fair enough, but actually it's not the real reason. The reason is basically where's my brush? The reason is the nut. The Gibson nuts were universally terrible. So their idea to bring out a sort of a 0 fret in a little cradle was a damn good idea. but like I say, the execution was dopey. And so as soon as, I think Graphtech in Canada, the makers of this, well, makers of Tusq, you will know them as the manufacturer of Tusq, as soon as they came across or saw this problem, they thought, here's an opportunity for us to create an insert which will turn the problematic Gibson brass 0 fret arrangement. It will leave the bass in place, but we'll use our Tusq insert to drop, we'll design it to drop straight into that frame or that cradle, which they did. So people who bought it, instead of waiting for or buying or whatever the titanium Gibson replacement, people who got the Tusq thing, like it's looking here, theirs was sitting on a brass cradle, and they could just drop it in like this, and guess what? It gave great tuning stability straight away without any worry at all. Now, what I'm just going to do a quick check on, is I'd like to start with the thing, everything down and the strings touching the first fret. So this is a little bit tall still, so I will take a little bit more off the bass. I'm doing it kind of by guesswork-ish, so it's, it's just a matter of, don't need to take too much, but this material is not the best at being sanded, I have to say. It's a sort of a slightly softer plastic, so, or printer filament stuff, so it doesn't behave like a bone nut would behave when you're sanding it. So it takes a bit more grunting effort to get it to where you need it to be. And I'm just kind of trimming off the little shards and leftovers. And I'll put it back in there and just double check it for height. So once I get to where I'm aiming for, which is to start with the strings almost there, I want to start with the strings touching the first fret, and then the idea is that the user then, player, just has to raise it up, or I'll raise it up, just to get the strings lifted, and really the only matter is how much your playing style needs the strings to be lifted above the first fret, and so it gives people options to set it. I'll set it for about 0.3 of a mil, but in Chris's case, for example, he wants the lightest possible first fret action that we can get, because his hand strength isn't great after some prolonged illness. That's fine. I'm going to go from there. It's just above, but it's so low that it's where I want it. Yeah. So Chris's hand strength is weakened. So the purpose of this, getting this nut or getting the first fret action set so low, is so that we can give him the lowest possible workable first fret action, so that he can have the lightest chords, bar chords, and so on at this end of the neck. And then, of course, the playability or the ease of playability at the other end is going to be assisted by having a nice low action, along with the mostly flat relief of the neck. In fact, I might just do a tiny tweak on the relief as well, because it's a little bit fraction higher than I would have. But so, like I say, I'm working the different variables to give the best, lowest action, playable action that we can get for a customer who has hand strength issues and wants it to be light and easy. So at the moment, the adjustable nut now is cut to size. It's actually a tiny bit above, but that's fine, because all we have to do now is just a tiny raise. It doesn't, as long as it's not too high when it starts, as long as it's under our target playing action, then we're fine. So let's just tighten all of these up. Like I say, I could have gone a bit lower, but this is almost perfect anyway. And the fact that it's a Tusq nut is what gives it the good tuning stability. It doesn't really matter that it happens to have a slanted slot, but in a way, actually, that's a bit of a misguided thing. A lot of people get hung up on that, but actually, when you have a slot, if the string has to change direction, the string doesn't care. It's going to have some problem. It doesn't care whether it's changing direction at the back of the nut, which is what you get with these slanted ones, or at the front, where when they're not. Sorry, it's changing direction here on the front because it's slanted. If it was a straight through nut, it would be changing direction on the exit. So it doesn't really. It's gonna hang up one way or another. So it's just that Tusq or Graphtec happen to have chosen to do it that way. That's fine. It doesn't matter. But it's a myth to think that there is any one way that is better than the other. The whole thing about straight through strings is about the pull through to the headstock, and it is much better if they went in a straight line generally, and that's why Fender did it the way they did it, because it's a better system. It's a better setup. But anyway, so this is, I'm going to put a tiny bit of curvature, a tiny bit of, ooh, that's interesting. That's coming away from, okay, we were just on the active side of relief at this point a minute ago, so it was having to be actively bent to give some relief. Now this is a bit too little because it's now dead flat. So I'm going to go backwards across into the mid. It's like the slack position of the truss rod, but I think it needs just a hint. So you could see, if you can see, I'm just doing very quick adjustments. I'll stop there. That's about 0.1, 0.15 of a mil, which is fine for me. So we've got, double check, we've got the relief set very low, as flat as possible. Now if I can't accommodate playing this guitar and it will not, if I get fret slap as I call it, or buzz, that I can't cure, then I may have to compromise and raise either the action or the relief, or one of these variables. But that's always a last sort of consideration. We aim for what we think it will do. No milk, but water packet, sort of mocha caramel thing. Okay, so so the thing about this method of setting up, or fret leveling, for example, is what we're doing here is just setting the guitar to an action that I know that I like to play, and lots of other people do. And typically, when we're younger and we get various different guitars come our way, especially when we're very young and we don't really know much about how they work, our first experiences tend to be living with what we get. So typically we get a guitar that maybe it's been made in a factory. Either if it's new, it's been cranked, the truss rod's been cranked in the factory and the action has been set, and they set the action more or less to as low as it will go, usually, without getting it stuck into sort of buzzing. And so they lower it until they get buzzing, and then they tend to back right off. And you get it like that, and that's what you have to live with. And the same applies when you get it second-hand from somebody who's tried the same. So they will have got the guitar, and they will then have spent some time messing about with it in their room and trying to make it play, and they lower the action, they tweak the truss rod and do a few things, and it still buzzes, and then they get sick of the buzz, so they kind of back off with the action, or they crank more relief into the truss rod so that they get it to play without the buzz, because that's the most annoying thing when you're playing on your own in your room, is this buzz. And so most guitars that we have come across, a lot of people will have come across, are sort of, the action is dictated by the underlying frets, basically. Now, a quick run over with this, it's not easy to see, but I can tell you as a diagnostic thing, this device tells me that this is even around about here, this is a bit higher, this is low, and then there's a low spot there. So there's two low spots. One is around the 11th and 12th, and then there's another spot at about the 15th. They're not massive though, and so you know, for a tiny bit of leveling with 400 grit, you know, this is showing me straight away that the where's it been gone? There it is. Showing me that the Epiphone inspired by Gibson do have better frets generally than the previous versions, the non-inspired by. So what I'm doing at this point is I'm just going to do a little bit more leveling, and I'm observing to see how low the low spots are, and whether they, with a bit of extra leveling here, which is again still very light by all accounts, I'm seeing how quickly it bottoms them out. And now at this sort of level of tweaking, I'm seeing it's good. High here, a little high there, still low there, okay-ish there. So it's the 11th that's low, and then the 15th. So I'm just going to write down 11 and 15 just so I know. Now what's interesting is that if I were to expect any playing issues because of those low frets, I would be able to usually be able to play and confirm them. And it's what's good about this method is because if you see, I'm leveling with the strings on, so I can immediately unhook the string not bad. So that's good. I mean, even though I can see it's low, it's not now so low that it's going to interfere with playability. So I'm going to pause or stop leveling there. So it's a tiny bit of leveling and some diagnosis, not fault finding, but yeah, diagnosing what it's telling me about the neck. Now, we know, most of us know about uneven frets, and interestingly, uneven frets, you know, they're very easy to tell because they tend to be, first of all, very localized. They'll be on one spot somewhere on your neck, and what they'll do is they will choke off the next note. Or sometimes if it's really bad, you'll get 2 or 3 frets all playing the same note, and that's a sign of a very uneven fret. And they're sort of, in a sense, they're easy to understand. That's a fret that's maybe seated badly. Maybe it's put in the wrong way. Oh, look at this, I'm playing this without even adjusting the action. That's amazing. Let's go to where I intended to go, which is to just dial up this action a tiny bit more. It's not really a problem in the leveling because it doesn't really feature in this part of the equation, so I'm just giving it a little bit. That's how I would set it to go out. But yeah, so the high frets, individual high frets, you can imagine them, you can visualize them, and you can see how your leveling beam can take them down. So we're choking out on 17, so 16 bent to 16, high E16 is choking on 17. Now that's pretty hard. I'm pushing it quite hard. High E16, choke 17. Yeah, that's quite picky, but we want it not to be choked. So now we're going to move to the G track. I'm going to recalibrate at this point, make sure that my my truss rod tool, the banana as I call it, is still calibrated to the overall shape of this neck, which it just about is. That's good. And again, that's something that sort of generally shows something else good about the neck when it doesn't change relief as you go across the radius. Some necks really will. It's not uncommon for that to happen, although it sounds pretty odd. So now as we go across into the G track, the G track is kind of important in that it's where in guitar playing it's the track that, if we're not talking about single high frets that are obvious that choke out the next note in normal play. The next worry is the slightly high frets that choke out bends, and that's what we just heard. So a high E bend on 16 was choking at 17, and what we'd like for this chosen action is to just tweak it with the leveling so it doesn't. See that? We've cleared it. That choke out is now clear, that tiny bit of leveling. Now you can imagine that the amount of actual leveling involved in that is minuscule, and all of these things are minuscule amounts. That's the amazing thing about this process, but also can change overnight if the environmental conditions change. Take it away to another part of the country, or it rains, or there's a warm front coming, or whatever. It can change quite quickly, and with it the wood can also change, and a tiny change in seasonal, if you like, change in the wood can result in the that tiny little clearance we just got through fret leveling disappearing again, mainly because the neck might go slightly flatter, which is, if you think about the wood being the thing that changes, if it gets warmer it might expand a little bit. If it goes to a more humid area it might expand a little bit. If it goes to a drier place it may dry very slightly and flatten more, whichever the way the grain in the wood tells it to do. It's not for us to prejudge it. But because of that, when you're working with low actions, they are by default susceptible to small changes in the weather. Now, at risk of blighting this is why I like these Epiphones, because they only require this little careful bit of leveling to get where I want to get. Yeah, so I guess the rule of thumb is this: if you're a player who likes a very low action, you're going to be also a player that has to get friendly with making adjustments to the truss rod. Otherwise, if you stay afraid of adjusting the truss rod, you're going to get caught out a couple of times a year potentially as the weather changes, and that's depressing when somebody, they spent good money, they think, getting the thing set up, and why should it suddenly be buzzing now? Well, it's because it's this thing that cannot be. The thing doesn't stay the same all year round. Everything I've done stays the same, but the basic underlying guitar moves the goalposts. Better, like it. So, low action, you really must learn to adjust your truss rod. But actually, you need to do that anyway, because there's nothing better than knowing for yourself how it changes when you make the adjustment. Because until you do that, you're in mysterious territory, and you'll be susceptible to what other people incorrectly state about truss rods and adjustment, and the myths and horror stories and stuff. So, for example, you might think, oh, but what do you exactly mean? Well, I'll show you in a second. Right, I'm just doing this last one here, last track, the low E, but in a second I'm just going to crank the truss rod all over the shop, and you might go, oh no, why are you doing that? You're going to ruin all the careful setup work you've done. Well, I won't, because the truss rod is a kind of dependable thing. It's only going to go a certain way, and it will go back a certain way when I'm done with it. So I want you to become unafraid of cranking it. Okay, so I'm just going to put the string back in, test play this low E, and then I think we should be kind of there. Now, a lot of this is experience tied in with an elegant method. That I think it's elegant, anyway. So it looks quite, so, you know, low E, but in a second I'm just going to crank the truss rod all over the shop, and you might go, oh no, why are you doing that? You're going to ruin all the careful setup work you've done. Well, I won't, because the truss rod is a kind of dependable thing. It's only going to go a certain way, and it will go back a certain way when I'm done with it. So I want you to become unafraid of cranking it. Okay. So what did I... Oh yes, I was going to mess the truss rod up. Right, so let's go. Let's give you a demonstration. So it's winter, and what happens is your guitar gets a bit warmer, you leave it hanging on the wall in the house or something, and come the winter or summer, I don't know, whatever, your central heating's been going for ages, and it's changed, and you come down to, you think, oh, Sam did a great setup, and you go, and maybe it's, you don't play it for a couple of months, and maybe it changes even more, and you go, oh no, look, Sam's going to risk damaging it by over tightening it. They said it could break the whole guitar, didn't they? Pick it up off the wall with your nice expensive setup. What in holy... Where's my guitar gone? Same guitar, nothing's wrong with it. But there is! I want my money back! Whew. Well, don't panic. You take your truss rod. If it's doing that, it's backbowed like I described earlier on. It's humped, and it's choking out all your strings in the first half of the... In fact, it's choking all of them out completely, because it's so backbowed and the action's low, it's killing all the notes. But here we are, we're going to go counterclockwise. Until when? Well, until it goes slack. Okay, so what happens when it goes slack? Right, forget the tuning, that's not the important bit. The point is the playability. But it's all back. No way, how did that happen? So that's the difference the truss rod makes. And so I say to myself, well, Sam, you've tweaked it right back, but how do you know it's anywhere near where you wanted? Well, you could get if you wanted to, get a capo, put it on there, or do it with hands like I did. Hold down the last fret, look into the middle, around about the 8th, and I can see that's really, really still very flat. But you know what? Does it play? It's a little bit flat. And if I go counterclockwise a tiny bit more, how much is a tiny bit more, Sam? Well, you're not afraid of cranking it anymore, are you? So it's as much as trial and error. And we check our relief again. That's about 1/10 of a mil. It's very, very small. Flat. Feels nice. Feels flat. Plays. We look at our first fret action. Do we really care what it is? Well, we want it to be as low as it can possibly be without and still be able to play it. So, well, we could even take it down a bit, because if you remember, we can go slack off a bit, because we had it down to almost sitting on its haunches here without it being a problem. So we can take it down even lower. And we can adjust it if it changes, remember? Okay, every time you do any of those changes, the tuning will change. So there you have it. You've now got really low first fret. I can barely have to touch this to make it play. It's incredible. There we are. So that little bit of careful fret leveling to diagnose and just tweak out a couple of tiny choke outs on the high bends, that's done pretty much we've leveled it enough to get rid of any slap on the bass strings. We've leveled it to get rid of that little tiny choke out. Epiphone's frets are so good that we don't expect any individual choking notes. I wouldn't have said that necessarily of the older model. This is definitely, since the inspired by Gibson stuff, it's definitely improved that much. But in the days before the inspired by Gibson, the Epiphone could have been I might have put it on a par with, let's say, a vintage model, or a if it was a Les Paul, it might have been a vintage, or a something like that, one of those similar Chinese things, because a lot of them are even made in the same factory. But anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop this nut on there, and I'm going to make sure it's in the right place. And to do that, I'm going to put on the strings very quickly and just ensure that they are all facing the right place. I've never found a better way of doing this. It's a little bit hurried for my liking as the glue sets, and I've just got one last grip at it, or one last go. I'm just going to let it bias the high E a fraction. I'm going to press on here, and I'm going to tighten the middle two first to hold the nut in place. Then I'm going to tighten the outside. And this is just while the glue for the nut glues set. Yeah, so the old Epiphones were, kind of on the par with the vintage or the Westfield. They were all just a good quality, decent quality Chinese or Far Eastern made guitar, but you occasionally would find a single high fret. It wouldn't surprise me on an Epiphone in those days, but it really would now. And what we're really doing with these, I'm doing with these, is just kind of fine tuning it, which is great. And but it still takes that ability to read the fingerboard from what the leveling tool's telling me, and to be able to know how to ease up and clean up individual notes. And usually, like I say, on a guitar of this quality, you usually find that the issues are choked bends at a low action, and the other thing is a little bit of fret slap, which is usually centered in the or around the low strings, because they move more, and that's all to do with the overall undulations of the neck. But I've gone into that many times on different videos. So what I'm going to do now I'm convinced that the glue is set, is I'm now going to say goodbye to these strings. Now obviously when I put the fit the new strings at the end, they're going to be lighter gauge, so they won't pull the neck probably as much, and so as a result I'm going to need to probably add some more positive counterclockwise turn into the truss rod, so that we get a little bit of relief, because I suspect the lighter gauge strings might not pull any at all. So these actually might be worth keeping as sacrificial strings for another job, so I don't have to break open the whole pack to use a sacrificial. I sometimes have had to do that recently. But if you get a decent or reasonable condition set of strings that are no longer needed, then it's a good idea to keep them coiled up somewhere. Always get stung by them. So having got the action the way I want it first, then having made the frets comply with that chosen action, I'm now going to basically recrown the frets, which won't take much because they're hardly let's put that over there for a minute. They're hardly flattened at all, but any leveling will flatten them very slightly. So what I'm going to do is let me show you something just so you can see. The base of the nut right now is in place, stuck in place, but if you're careful, if you see, we may pull the whole thing up. No, there you go, there's the adjustable part and the brass strip in the middle that I use to keep it, just give it an extra little footing so I can just brush out some of the dust on there. So what it means is that this insert section will always be loose, so I always recommend there's a wider edge that goes facing forwards, so you pop it in there like that, it'll fit neatly back in. Actually it won't come out, this is a nice fit, but if it does come out, then I always recommend putting the new strings, put the middle two on first, tighten them up, that'll hold it in place. And if you're taking the strings off, take the outside ones off first and work in towards the middle so it holds. It doesn't run the risk of the E string flipping this piece off across the floor, which it can do if it's loose. In this case it's pretty snug. So that's that. Neck of my fingernails. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to mark up the frets for recrowning. So like I said, not a lot of flattening went on here, but just to make sure that we take any areas that we did flatten in the leveling process, I'm going to reshape them without lowering the fret anymore. So there's a nice tool from StuMac that I use, or have used for more than 9 years. I've been doing this, and we use that to basically round off the squared, well not squared, sorry, flattened. So when you flatten a fret, you leave a kind of junction between the flattened part and the sorry about that, between the flattened part and the curved part, and that kind of makes an edge, and so we don't want that edge. So the idea is that we take this concave file, diamond coated file, and we use it to just round off that edge a little bit, and it leaves, if you do it right, it leaves a very, very, very fine, or you should aim to leave an incredibly fine black line of marker pen down the center. And that means that this tool hasn't touched the center part of that fret, but it has rounded off the shoulders, if you like. So that's why it's a nifty tool. And so that was nice and quick, and we'll go up and we'll see the other ones probably be as quick. And as soon as that they as soon as they kind of silver, go to clear, and it shows there's no pen on them, it means that we didn't touch them at all. It's probably the lower of the few frets. Now there's a bit more to do on this edge here, because that one was very slightly high compared to its neighbours, and that's what would be causing any fret slap, that little raised edge of the fret there. So I sort of work it a little bit, stop and look at it, and then move on. So I'm just going to bring all this in. Some of the factories, and I think even Epiphone do this now on these guitars, I think they do a radius block level. I couldn't see any signs of it on this one, but a lot of factories do do a radius block level. And this is a fairly higher fret. Yeah, they do a leveling, quick leveling with the radius block, and that's a good idea in that it allows somebody to have at least an option to lower the action out of the box. The downside of it is to save on money and time. They typically don't recrown. Some may do, you never know, they may get wise to it and do it, but in my experience they typically don't recrown. They tend to just take this fingerboard neck to the buffer and shine up the frets, and it's not a terrible end of the world crime, because to be honest, most of the flat spots aren't really so bad as to mess up your guitar's intonation. But for perfectionists, there is an intonation issue if you don't round off these flattened spots, and if you have a flat spot, it means that the intonation point on your guitar moves closer towards the bridge, and that will slightly upset the intonation for that particular fret. So we don't want that, but I can understand why they do it in some factories, because it cuts out all of this recrowning section, which actually isn't that hard, but some factories seem to avoid it. And the reason I know that is because I've seen quite a lot of guitars come, and you can see the flattened area, but the frets are nice and shiny, so it's only the crowning stage has been omitted. So that's the recrowning part. The next part, just going to give it a quick wipe down, get some of the muck off it, and then a grimy old rag, but it'll do, taking the pen off. So this is about getting any marker pen off the frets, as well as lifting any dust on the fingerboard. So, and I'll clean it again afterwards. So this is just to get rid of most of the stuff. You can see there's quite a lot of pen on there from that process. So what we do next is we're going to mask off the fingerboard and polish the frets out. Now it's interesting how one of the areas that some guitar manufacturers have, or they exhibit some finish adhesion issues, and I've had a few of those recently. Fender is, I'm afraid, one of the culprits in this, and what it can mean is that if you mask off the fretboard, which is a sort of the luthier's standard way of doing it, it can pull off. Even if you use the lowest low-tack stuff, it can cause the darned finish. If there's a crack, for example, it can pull the finish off. And I had a lovely sort of eggshell blue or Daphne blue, eggshell blue, sonic blue Fender in the other day, Adams, and there was a crack down there where there often is on a Fender, and yeah, I did the leveling and then went to take the stuff off, and this old tape pulled a chunk of that off, but it was cracked and waiting to come off anyway. But it was just so depressing. And I've had Fenders that where the finish just comes off because they were Fenders and they've got a poor adhesion. You can do things like you can try and minimize it by cutting along here, but even that isn't a guarantee. So it's a one in only a small number, but it's just horrendous when it happens. Yeah, I mean, and a lot of Fenders, particularly maple, gloss finished maple Fender Strat necks or tellies, particularly American and Mexican ones from a particular era, actually fairly quite modern. They seem to just be dying to lose their finish at the drop of a hat, which is so depressing, especially for an owner who's, for example, they may have sent it to me for a refret and they want, their guitar looks brand spanking new, albeit it's got Fender's rather stupid system of spraying over the frets, which is asking for trouble. So you go and try and refret it, and before you know it, their method of spraying is causing finish to come off, because when you remove frets that have been sprayed over, even if you cut everything as tightly as you can, or you've minimized the damage, you're breaking up a carpet effectively and leaving lots of little tabs. Whereas if the thing's been done first and then fretted, it's separated by the slots, but it's one very flat piece rather than the carpet, which goes up and down in sort of little hillocks. So it's just not a good surface to fret back onto. But also, because of the way the finish goes up the side of the fret, it's also just waiting to fall off once you've removed the fret, and so I had to refinish the whole thing, which was just annoying. And so that's Fender. Not a problem, obviously, on the fingerboards of the rosewood and stuff, but I've still also had problems with the finish on the backs of the necks of their guitars, and that definitely was a stickiness problem. For some reason, the stuff they put on just if you cracked it, if it was a complete shell, it would stay. But if you've got a split or something like the neck pocket split, because the neck heel is fractionally too wide for the pocket, and you bolt it in, and the pressure has to go somewhere, so it splits the big, thick eggshell finish. And before you know it, it's the rest of it saying, right, that's it, broken that bit off, the rest of me is coming off. Anyway, so thankfully this lovely old Epiphone doesn't have that kind of problem. Never has so far, so hopefully I'm not tempting fate too much to say that. Okay, so I'm now going to change to put this out, hang this up for a split second, and I'm going to get me a tile to cut some thinner pieces of whatchamacallit, masking tape. Actually, might I be able to make do with what's on here? I might be able to make do with what's on here. Save cutting a whole new lot. Yeah, so so you have to cut sort of extra thin bits, and I use a tile for this because it's not a very good cutting surface, but you use anything else, everything else eventually shreds, and you start, it's comfortable for cutting the little thin strips, but when you lift them up, they pull up the fibres of your scarred wooden plank that you've been using for years, so not so good. Yeah, so the precision part of the setup, using that fret leveling method, which I've been using now for at least 8 years, and I wouldn't use any other, it's worked well. And the precision part of it is done. And what's great is that having done the frets with that method, I can take the neck, well, not on this guitar, but you could take the neck off, you could, leave it for 6 months, put the neck back on, and with the same strings on, it would go right back to exactly the configuration that we had it in, and it would be leveled, ready for that, ready to go. So it's a kind of, it's a really nice way of getting the accurate, the precision bit done early on. And often if there's other work to do now, it might be changing electrical components and so on and so forth. You can do all of that, forget the precision part, and then just put it all back together again later on, and lo and behold, you've got, your neck is already leveled for the action that you want. And you can lose all the settings on the bridge, you can lose everything, the nut could be dropped out and you might have to put another one in, or you've lost the settings on the adjustable nut, and it's fine. You just put it all back to where you want it, and the frets are already leveled to perform with that low action, and that's what's great about the method. So I think I should be able to get done with these last remaining bits. Couple more bits. Righty-ho. Right, we'll get a bit of green tape out for this. Cover this pickup as well as the last fret. I'm really only covering that pickup to prevent it getting any abrasions from the cloth. It's not to protect it from pickup dust, from fret dust. I've had this discussion loads of times, but filed fret dust is not magnetic. It does not find its way into pickups and cause them to rust. And the reason it is because it's got no magnet, it's no ferrous part. I've done tests, and the strongest of magnets do not attract nickel silver, or what do we call nickel silver, that particular alloy that we use. certainly doesn't attract stainless steel. And the only thing that even vaguely attracted, and it's also incredibly slight, and you wouldn't worry about it in terms of dust, is Evo Gold, which seemed somehow to have a very slightly more ferrous, whatever you might call it, magnetically responsive metal in its alloy. And that's it. So when people get all telly-offy, yes, steel wool, is that what it's called? Yeah, steel wool, more properly iron wool. Steel wool, wire wool, is that what they call it? I forgot what it's called now. That definitely has, will magnetize or will stick to your pickups, and well, people say it will get in and rust and cause shorts. That's their worries. Maybe it will over time, if you can rust stick to the. You have to be doing quite some weird work to cause a coil to cross connect one part of the coil to another, especially if the coil's potted. But anyway, I wouldn't want it to be in there rusting away any more than you would. So I absolutely agree with the idea that you don't want wire wool getting near your pickups. So I cover them up when I do anything with wire wool. But like I say, frets, you don't need to. And now you know, you've heard it here. And I only know because I've experimented to prove it, so I can be certain that what I'm saying maketh senseth. Nothing worth declaring something and actually not knowing. It's much better to do the experiment so that you know of what ye speak. And what better way than to discover whether fret wire is in any way magnetic than to hold up a very powerful magnet to various different types of fret wire. It's not actually that hard to do. Okay, so I'm going to do a bit of, I might as well, let's see what's the battery doing. I've got it on as low as possible. So we're ready to, what's the word, thingy out, sand and polish out the frets now. I can leave it going from here for fun. As long as the battery hangs in there, it should be fine. So I've got my chunk of my ready-made sandpapers. I've got me a bunch of my micro mesh papers ready, and a sort of rubber pad that I tend to use. So the first thing I'm going to do is just run over with my 400 grit just a little bit in the backwards and forwards, longitudinal direction. For some reason, some days I can hold on to this and it works, other days it just skids everywhere. I don't know why, like that. Anyway. Well, I think my fingers are not sticky. I don't mean that like wet sticky, they're not grippy, because I've been sanding with 80 grit paper recently, last couple of days, and I think it's basically taken away the ability to grip. So it is. So I'm just doing this by hand to begin with. I could do all of it by hand, I suppose. I tend to get blisters after a while. So I'm going to switch to this padded block inside a padded block, and it just gets a bit noisy and probably annoyingly noisy. So I'm also looking to basically get rid of all the grade of scratches on here that came from the Recrowning file. So the first paper in here is equivalent to the paper that's on the fret leveling beam, the banana, which is 400 grit, which is this. But it may be, I'm not quite sure whether, I think the file is 300, so we've got to go from 300 to 400 on the tops of the frets. And once we've done that, and then we move on. So I'm also kind of bringing in the edges of the frets a little bit because they're quite sharply machined on this guitar. So the aim is to soften them up a little bit. Never run out of, I need to get some more foam because I've never got the right size shaped block. It tends to wear out after a while. I went down to the doctor's for one of those well-man blood testy things at my age, and I kind of booked it because I'd made the mistake of checking my blood pressure on Claire's blood pressure monitor thing. It's a bit like looking things up on Google if you don't feel well, but I wasn't feeling unwell. But I checked my blood pressure and it was in the orange warning department for the 3 times I checked it. So I thought, right, that's it, I'm going to go and book in. And so anyway, she sat me down, the nurse, and she first of all did a blood pressure check, 2 in a row or something. She said, no, absolutely perfect, nothing wrong with you. Right. So, and then she took some blood and sent it off for about 10 different tests, including cholesterol and so on and so forth. And then she did that thing where they say, if there's nothing unusual, then you won't hear from them. Oh, right, okay. I don't quite know whether that's worse than they'll call you anyway and discuss your results, and then you get a chance for them to tell you there's nothing wrong, or the fact that if the phone goes or you get a message saying please come in and discuss your test results, then you can worry about it for as long as it takes to get the appointment to come in and see them. I don't know. Anyway, so this is all sandpaper, not micro mesh, but wet and dry stuff. So I'm now going through 1500, 2 sheets of each, finally ending up on the 1500, and then after that I go on to the micro mesh through to 12,000, and that's it. You can kind of carry on, and I've tried doing polishing and stuff, and it makes it look a little bit better, but it doesn't really seem to make much improvement after that point. By the time you're at 12,000 grit on the micro mesh, it doesn't feel like there's a lot more to do. Anyway, so this is how exciting the sanding process is. Noisy, exciting. Once this is finished, then I give it an all-over clean, and once it's cleaned I will oil the fingerboard and we'll put new strings on and double check the relief, and also then, well, I won't do the intonation tonight because I will leave that until the new bridge comes in, but that won't be on video because I'll just do it at home, say carting the guitar back here just to change the bridge, which I can just as easily do at home. But when it's changed, I'll just check and double check the intonation and stretch the strings out, and then it'll be ready. I had originally said to Chris to schedule to pick it up next week, but if it's finished before the weekend, then that's fine too. Because I've got the strings, I've got the adjustable nut, and I don't think the bridge will be more than a day or 2 at most. It's coming from Northwest Guitars, who are very good with their postage and timing. Whew. home at the moment. I'm doing some final sanding to my new Trekkie number 10 build, my little custom builds of travel guitars, small travel guitars, but full weight ones. So it's a really nice stage where it's final softening the shape, doing the final little carves, and then working the sandpaper grades through so it gets smoother and smoother. And the idea is that in a few days' time, maybe at the weekend, it'll be ready for maybe true oiling if I got some left. I've got finger nail broken. Just try and stop it from catching. Yeah, so true oil and or some stain and satin nitro. The true oil does a really nice job of darkening. They don't need much of it unless it's going to be its own sort of standalone finish, but true oil as a darkener on top of stain is really nice. And then once a true oil has cured, it goes really well with satin nitrocellulose clear coat, which makes a really nice workable dry to the touch finish. It's not sticky like gloss, obviously, but it's just a really it's a very forgiving finish that doesn't get scratched or marked the way that gloss can do while you're in the sort of making and sanding stage, which can be completely disheartening. I think these pieces of micro mesh are probably going to need replacing soon on the 12,000. Right. So this whole sanding process, what one's that, 1500, produces a fair bit of dust. So bits of paper are trying to fall through. Yeah, so need to clean up after you've used it. It is a slightly messy process, but so you get dust on the body of the guitar, so you need to be ready to clear all that off, and then we can remove the masking tape. Yes, so at least the blood pressure is good. That's nice to know. And I guess the tests are all the various cholesterol, red, white blood cells, and so on. So, and I think it's, all of the tests are sort of diagnostic for typical maladies, kidney function and so on and so forth. But it gets, when you get to the 60 sort of age, it gets quite frightening to ask them to check things, because you sort of think, oh, everybody, I'm 60 and I've been lucky enough to not had any major things wrong. Touch wood and touch tone wood. But at the same time, I also feel hugely grateful, generally, just to have lived so long with so little major suffering or illness. It's just nothing we can guarantee anymore. And even after the we shall not speak of it pandemic, a lot of people are still suffering, or suffering more after that than they did before it, apparently. So whatever, it's a bit there's a lot of people not in a good way, so I feel for every day that I wake up, I feel extraordinarily blessed and grateful. And I don't mean religious sense, but in a very human sense, that I genuinely feel appreciative of my day that begins by waking up, and waking up in relative peace in this neighbourhood and so on and so forth, and then waking up to, you know, being able to make a cup of coffee, and having a car that starts just about, even if it's not a nice new car that's full of mod cons and sporty accoutrements, but you know what, it's a car and it gets us to the supermarket. And I'm very, very happy to earn a crust doing work I really enjoy doing, even if it's as boring as up and down with the sanding block and, you know, this sort of stuff, which occasionally I sort of think, oh God, no, do I have to go up there tonight? And then it's like, well, yeah, who's going to pay the bills? Who's going to pay the rent? Who's going to pay for the car? So reality says, yes, you must go there and do some grind work, grindstone. So up I come. I'm just going to wash my hands a minute. Up I come, feeling blessed and lucky to do what I do. And I don't suppose I was always like that. I don't think I ever remember being, well, I don't remember taking things for granted or even being ungrateful, but actually I must have been a bit like that, because I was pretty unconscious at times. You know, I've talked about this before in the past, but you know, I used to, I can remember in my tangible living memory when I first started smoking. I mean, first of all, there's an unconscious stupid thing I did. And I don't mean for you, I mean for me, it's a stupid thing. But I remember when I was smoking first years ago, and you know, I can actually see myself tearing off cellophane off a new packet of cigarettes and chucking it on the floor sometimes. Not always, but sometimes I can see myself doing it, so I must have done it. And I don't remember seeing myself go miles out of my way to put it in a bin somewhere. And then I would throw my cigarette butts out the car window, because they weren't really rubbish. And you didn't want them in the car in an overflowing ashtray or something disgusting like that, because it would smell horrible. And if you chucked it out, you could pretend you didn't smell horrible and carry on smoking. Anyway, you know, I was unconscious about it, really, and self-destructive. And so it's no surprise that I was destructive of the planet and chucked my fag butts out. That's American English colloquialism for you Americans. But yeah, it's hard to believe. I find it hard to reconcile that was me, but it was. And at some point, I don't think couldn't have been any single moment, but at some point it became unthinkable to do that. I don't really know where it was. Maybe just when I stopped being quite so unconscious, and but it was never like one big thing. So I remember being unable to throw things away. Like I couldn't bear seeing people chuck rubbish, but I was still smoking and killing myself. You know, that kind of thing. So I wasn't in any enlightened being type mode. I was maybe less destructive and a bit more aware of things, but there must have been some point, but I guess I'm saying it's never some point where you go from being flawed to being perfect. It isn't like that, but I guess you realize as you go along, maybe you're a bit less destructive now than you were. Anyway, that was but I couldn't have been very grateful, despite whatever I thought about myself, because, you know, when I was younger, I remember being very unhappy being where I was at certain times. I hated living in certain towns and feeling like I was stuck there, and I guess like lots of ungrateful, slightly over scared young people, I was just one of those. And I used to write a kind of diaries, and it was just a lot of whinging, basically, as some people's poetry and diaries or whatever often is. Sometimes some people's songs are born out of that, but yeah, I was always, thankfully I don't keep any of those anymore, but I remember I used to be able to look at these old diaries and I used to get to a point where I'd cringe, thinking, was I really that ungrateful about everything that the world offered me? Did I really spend that much time thinking it was so hard, such a hard time and so unfair? And I think for a period of time I really did. And I'm not truly ashamed of it. I just couldn't be that. I'm glad I couldn't be that person anymore. So somewhere in all of that, I went from being that sort of person to being genuinely pleased to be alive and well, and to be 60 and waking up and not being one of the people that never made it to 60, whether because of they got cancer at 55 or 40 or 35. We're very grateful for every day. Now, do I think I use it the best, perfect way every day? No. I'm a procrastinator and can be lazy, and but you'll never find me ungrateful for what I have. I don't know if I try to think, sometimes you try to think, there was a point in life where you figured something out, and I think there was for me. There's a point in life where I learned something of awareness and acceptance, I think, and that really changed. Getting that, inverted commas, getting it really changed. Changed my approach completely, I think. And again, it didn't make me some sort of perfect being or even have the most perfect life or anything, but I do remember, almost clearly remember, around about then, stopped worrying the way I'd always worried. Completely different relationship to the here and now, I think. Yeah, it was that sort of time where I think where I understood that there was this difference between what I'd thought, what I kind of made things mean. I would be caught up in this sort of substance of things, and I'd take them as reality, and I didn't. This is before a period of time before I understood, started to learn, or came to understand that things only meant what I made them mean. And that was sounds glib to just say it like that, but it was if and when you make sense of that for yourself, it can be an absolutely astonishing shift in understanding, because I realised that everything was nothing was nothing. No, it's not true. So, science is real. Evidence-based things are real, but nothing was real, as in nothing meant anything. Things just were as they were, and I realized how much interpretation I brought to my reading of the world. Maybe that's another way of putting it. My construct of reality, I thought it was because it was reality, it's there. And actually, it was a point in time when I realized how much I played a part, or the part I played in it. And that was a massively empowering thing for me. Because when you realize that, you suddenly have this immense power to change it. How do I go to the right note? Just by randomly tuning. Anyway, that's where I sort of ended up at. And I suppose you could put it another way and say that I assumed the responsibility for what things mean in my world, or what they mean to me. And sometimes you sort of, it's really hard to explain what that means in practical terms. So I try to explain it sometimes like the real examples or solid examples I can think of. So for example, I've talked about this before, but I read this, or listened to this a concept or a piece of information that said one of the things paraphrase, when you're not aware of the role you play in creating what you call reality and meaning, is that you find that you can find yourself constantly trying to get somewhere else. That's one of the signs of not having awareness and thinking that you've always got to be somewhere, and that where you are right now is a problem to be fixed. And there was a question posed, and that was, in any moment, and you could do this right now, next time, well, it could be in anything, but good examples, right? So the question was this: right now, if you're absolutely honest with yourself, are you reducing this present moment that you're in right now, I'm in right now, am I reducing it to a means of just a means of getting to somewhere else? Is that all I'm making it mean to me? Just a way of getting to somewhere else? And that somewhere else actually is often, get home, get food, eat, drink beer, smoke dope, eat fags, whatever I used to do. I was constantly, everything was about, get home, get something to eat, get home, lie down, finish this drive. And what I realized is that the answer to that question for me was mostly yes. And it could be yes 10 minutes ago when I was doing that sanding. So sanding is tiring, noisy, boring. And if I'm honest, or if I'm not just honest, if I'm unconscious and I don't ask the question, which I didn't earlier, I was probably going through that sanding to try and get to the finish because I wanted to finish. And so you might say, well, what do you mean by that? It's like, you've got to finish, it's not a great job, yada, yada, yada. But what I found is if I become aware of that. So take, for example, a classic one would be a car drive. If you get stuck in traffic, the first thing that happens is you notice you get angry. You start to, oh God, I'm going to be late. Why is this traffic doing this? And it's very easy to become kind of angry and freaked out and start to wail, and it kind of suddenly becomes, oh God, what, it means I'm going to miss this, I'm going to be late for that, or come on, pull over, get moving, lady, madam, sir, whatever, and you find what you notice, if you're conscious of yourself and your feelings, you realize you're suffering, you're in discomfort, if I'm honest, I'm not accepting the present moment exactly as it is. I'm wishing it was something else. If only traffic was moving. If only I wasn't sitting here feeling frustrated because the lady in front hasn't moved and she didn't take the opportunity to take that when the lights change. And you get all of that stuff that goes on. But I've realised that for me, all it means is I'm at odds with the present moment. I'm trying to get through to some thing that my mind is telling me, my ego, whatever you want to call it, is telling me would be better, when I'm at home and I've got a cup of tea, or I'm, doing something I like to do, and it's all better, and I fixed my problem, which is whatever now is like. And so the answer when used to be in the car in traffic jams is, and it used to be on trains in London when I was doing corporate work, and I'd find myself, if I was on a train thinking I'm late for somewhere and I'm feeling bad and I this and I that, and I would do that thing and I'd ask myself that question, I would kind of quieten my mind down and say, are you reducing this moment, which could be your last moment ever, to just a means of getting to the future, a future moment? And the truth is, in that underground train where I was feeling, got to get home, got to get there so I can get the train to get home, get the car, Claire will pick me up, get home, then it's Saturday, then I can go to sleep, then I get up. And the honest answer was, yes, I am. I'm on this tube train and I'm actually not present. I'm not living fully. I'm here living as though the only reason for living here in this moment is to get through to some other moment which my brain or my mind or my ego has convinced me is going to be better for X, Y, Z or other reason. And that, when I realized that, for me, that was just an amazing wake up to realize that if I just wanted to become aware, all I had to do was ask myself that question whenever I felt that discomfort of frustration come up. And if I asked myself that question, what it made me do, the thing that changed was I would consciously then stop thinking about getting through the traffic jam or getting through that sanding. As soon as I asked myself the question and I kind of made myself conscious, I'd almost have to become more present in the moment. So instead of thinking, I'd stop myself thinking about getting through the traffic jam, and I would relax, sit back, turn the car engine off if it's going nowhere, wind down the window, smell the beautiful greenery around, all the things, to feel what the seat feels like, be happy that my wife is sitting next to me and we're together in this car that's running, and there's stuff on the radio that's interesting to listen to, and whatever. And so that the thing that changed it was asking the question and raising my awareness of how wasteful I was in that moment, just using it as a means to get to a future that my ego was convincing me would be somehow better than the present moment. And that was the catch, that was the trap to suffering. And and the physical change, the actual change, was to be just more in the moment, and that was actually quite easy to do. You can think of it, you can say, right, I'm just gonna sit here, I'm gonna deliberately relax, I'm gonna let go of, I'm gonna say to myself, okay, if I don't get there on time, what's the worst that's going to happen? No, it isn't even going to happen, and just give myself suddenly permission to let go of the things about it that I was telling myself were so important, which kind of gave me permission to get all stressed and whiny and self-pitying about it. So that's a real thing that I learned along the way, and I can do it now. And you know, in the last 10 minutes I've been doing this, I've been very conscious of not rushing to go home and whatever, sit down, watch YouTube, put my feet up. I've kind of made myself think about the quality of being here in the moment, talking on this video and looking at this beautiful, shiny, tobacco bursty, sunbursty instrument. I've been proud of setting it up. Yeah, and it's ready to go in its bag and go home. Yeah. So anyway, that's just an example of what changed for me somewhere along the way, and how I apply it. It's very practical and it's very simple for me, but it's a profound different state of affairs. And so the worst that happens, look at my untidy place. The worst that happens is that the worst that happens is, let's put this on 0.5. The worst that happens is I just catch myself being unconscious again, like doing the polishing just then. But that's okay. Always fall into that sort of unconsciousness. I don't fear doing that, because I can ask myself that question. Look at this, you know, are you unconsciously reducing the present moment to merely a means to getting to a future moment? And actually, when I started to put that little tool into practice for me, I began to see how much of my life I'd literally done that on a grand scale. So, in truth, my time with my kids when they were growing up, most of that was I spent in that trapped thing of being on a journey to another time where it would be easier, less stressed, they wouldn't be crying, they'd be asleep, I wouldn't be fighting with them, they wouldn't be messing up the house, whatever it was, you know, continually living in a kind of state of thinking it was going to get a bit better down the line, or let's hurry up and get through the day and then blah blah blah, you know, we'll do something else, and it's too late. You know, you can't change that, you can't put that right, but what you can do is you can make every moment now, if you want to live more fully, you can make every moment richer for yourself, and nothing here changes for doing it other than how I feel about it. So anyway, just thought I'd blather on and share that with you, since that's just a part of me. We're done. Chris, I hope you enjoyed seeing your lovely Epiphone ES339, which is ready to go, and I will put the new bridge on when it arrives at home, and I'll reset the action. Well, I've done tweaked the neck relief, so it's adjusted for the 9 gauge strings, and we're good to go. Thank you for watching as always, yeah, I'll see you again soon for another guitar on the bench at Relove Guitars. And it's March, and soon outside of there it'll be warm, and soon I will be swinging in my hammock looking at the blue skies and the green trees overhead. Thank you, see you soon.